Hello. This is called the Dingo Poem. When the chopper flew overhead, Dingo was snapping flies, and as she looked up, midges were making her eyelids close. Bats were blanking out satellites, and Dingo and all the other dingoes stalked the goats, tracked and stalked and ate the goats, who ate grass and bleated and multiplied across the island. Then Dingo was trapped and smelt sweat and went for a helicopter ride. And when she saw the willy wagtails enticing children into the bush, she demanded to be released. But the pilot couldn't hear above the engine roar, and the sniper who was sitting beside her checked the batteries in her collar. He was the man with diarrhea, the man who listened to music to distract himself from his disease, who was delirious and stumbled on a log and didn't see Dingo sniffing his spew. He saw her red dot was where he was on the screen. They were linked. The red dots were a blood trail jumping across the riverbed, across the fallen tree, and across the heavy range. Dingo trotted to the gorge mouth to watch bubbles rise from flooded sand surrounded by crow prints, and she walked faster and paused less, her body under intensifying heat. She passed a decaying bovine shot from 1,000 feet. Over the wound the dried blood is deep and leaf litter accretes. And Dingo ran her body along the cool chasm walls bent like branches, or batholith, or ghost gum trunk, tracking the curves that bent back on themselves. Dingo knocked loose a fossilised invertebrate before lapping up a drink and chasing a rock rat into the spinifex bush. That's where footprints near the white signs brought unseasonal grass that Dingo didn't eat. No, she ran along her boundary, marking her territory, and found a fence near a burnt pine and stunted acacia. She climbed to the lookout and saw the crater where a strange reflection stood out. And Dingo sensed she helped build a track by walking where the humans walk, and sniffing the young girl's red cotton thread. She rarely stopped, because stopping leads to memory, and memory leads to song, and song leads to tracks, and tracks chart the stars, and stars bring highways, and highways lead to automobiles that take away her babies. And she cries to her friends across the highway. Her wounds were red where her womb separated. And then Dingo walked into the campers' laughter, into firelight. Dingo's bright green eyes disappeared and returned to skirt peripheral light. And she stayed close to where the bins overflowed, and later her dry nose pestered the atmosphere as we slept in our swags, her ribs swelled with barbecue smell, and our cheese and cracker snacks vibrated in her stomach. In your sleep, Dingo tugs at your sleeping bag. She likes to rip holes in your shopping bag. And when you begin to report her sighting to a caravan of caravans, you decide to keep Dingo's memory inside. Dingoes are shy, yes. They are the ghost of an old friend, for when you spot them they scarper. With the sound of paws on pebbles clack, clack, clacking, you think you are closer to Dingo than the mosquito. But the dingo's cat-like independence defies all friendship. And soon you'll discover the kind of fear dingoes evoke is the same as words filled with poison and poison-filled collars set to explode with a mouse button click. And maybe the light-emitting diode goes flat because dingoes that burn cycads that stand sentinel-like near the Namahole, or the land that's left when the world ends. She'll return with a broken heart, and with a sore knee she'll nibble at the pain licking the blood, inside the cave where the dolomite and quartzite collide, where echidnas and zebra finches breed. After a rainless decade, the chalet closed, and Dingo watched the remains of the building rot, and the sunlight on the breakaways hit the tombstone's shapes, and her song echoed in the canyon. And she jumped up on the piano and sang, and people travelled for miles and miles to hear her sing, until the bitch on heat with a new song entered, and she was beaten back, and she snapped at flies with her jaw, and she felt the sunrise warmer, and felt full and content for once. Dingo with her soft white hair trotted along her boundary, and I believe Dingo stepped on schist that gave way, smashing and dividing downhill. Dingo was roaming, seeing, feeling. She was falling towards the stars behind the stars. The world turned against Dingo the day the tombstone figures screamed and yelled, and she ingested the colourless salt, and her citric acid cycle collapsed. But she kept running, sweating, convulsing, confused and agitated, and burning with 1080 poison. Dingo felt the sniper's rifle, the camel cull, the roo cull, the fox cull, the rabbit cull, the cane-toad cull, and the starling cull. And the dingo's ears pricked, and she felt the crosshairs, and she stared the sniper down, and saw the crow's feet around his one closed eye, and his trigger figure faltered. But he shot anyway. Yes, he shot anyway. And he followed her blood trail on the screen. And he was sick, but he found her. He found her lying in the red centre of an ancient spinifex. And when the killer bent to pick up her carcass, her sharp teeth struck his throat, and she shook his neck and head, and he beat her with his fists, and you could hear them together, thirsty, wounded, and whining all night long.